Hi everyone, Caden Burton here at Brick Fair Chantilly 2025. We're going to be taking a look at the fourth build in the operational timeline for the Battle of Okinawa. This is Hacksaw Ridge, famously by the 2016 film with Andrew Garfield starring as Desmond Doss. So, again, a part of the Battle of Okinawa. When we landed in April of 1945, the Marines went north to capture the northern point and eventually capture the Matoba Peninsula, which we saw last year with Mount Yaitake, where the Army kind of stayed central and then pushed south with Kadena Airfield into the Shuri Line. So Hacksaw Ridge, originally known as the Mieda Escarpment, is one of the first ridges on the Shuri Line down towards the southern part of Okinawa, where Colonel Ushijima had the bulk of his defensive force. This was a pretty influential battle. The way that the geography of Okinawa is set up, they have lots of limestone cliffs, ridges, and mountains that proved pretty difficult for the U.S. troops to be able to push through. The Japanese were very entrenched, especially in the southern part of Okinawa. So we're essentially depicting a lot of the scenes from not only the movie, but some of the documentation I was able to find. It's not a very well documented skirmish, but the mostly made famous by the actions of Desmond Doss, who served in Leyte as well as Guadalcanal and one or two other campaigns in the Pacific. But he, in this specific instance and across the Battle of Okinawa, it is documented that he saved up to 75 U.S. troops, both Army, Marines, and I believe even several Japanese soldiers as well, being a conscientious objector, refusing to carry a weapon, serving as a combat medic with the 307th Infantry Regiment in the 77th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army. And so this is just depicting the battle of that division coming up over the cliff and fighting against the Japanese entrenched here.
Okay, and like you mentioned, this is an ongoing series. It's been happening for several years now, so you've done really impressive builds in this series. What have you kind of learned along the way that kind of led up to this build and your approach with this one?
So I'm learning that trying to play with a lot more of the kind of niche skirmishes and battles of a larger campaign, you learn where things were documented and things weren't. Mount Yaitake was another one where there was very little reference material. This one, again, there was one picture that I could find of Hacksaw, and it's from the bottom looking up where the cargo nets are. So all the reference material that I have out in front is only some kind of topographical maps and then a write-up of Desmond Doss himself to really kind of caricaturize the heroic actions that he was awarded the Medal of Honor for.
And you've done a lot with rocks and cliff work now, so what is the internal structure like? What have you found works well for these really large-scale builds?
So this one I wanted to try a different technique for rock work. So last year, obviously, we saw the nets utilized with Mount Yaitake. So this one is actually entirely snot panels used for the rock work to make up the cliff face. And the interior of it is actually almost entirely hollow. So the base plates themselves, there are Technic frames that run across that hold up all the landscape, and each one has a few pillars underneath supporting it, but for the most part, it's entirely hollow.
So when you say panels, are you kind of building basically slopes on plates and then kind of sticking those on essentially to make a rock face here?
Exactly. So the front of the cliff is actually broken up into 6 pieces, and each one is 2 16 by 16 plates, all built sideways and then attached on their side to the walls. So it blends from vertical building at the bottom to the snot building back to vertical building on top. I was able to use some brackets, some headlight bricks, and some other pieces to really make it as seamless as possible.
Yeah, and it turned out fantastic. It looks really nice. So that brings us to the top of the cliff here, and you of course have a lot of variations there. So how do you kind of plan that out in terms of how you're going to do little trenches and things like that and make sure it all fits together?
So the biggest thing was kind of picking the main points. So obviously I knew I wanted to have 2 bunkers, and I knew towards the center I wanted to have a Japanese cave opening with a small skirmish between bayonets and some of the U.S. troops there. And that was really kind of where I started. I laid out where those things were going to be. I would kind of line out where the trench was, pick some other segments along the way. And the real pieces that I started with was this front edge, because I really wanted to play with this technique of utilizing some friction connections with the cheese slopes to give this kind of more natural earth layer edge to it. And in doing that, it kind of let me decide where my elevation changes and things were going to be, and then just kind of driving back towards against the cross of the plates.
Yeah. And it's always interesting to see what you do for your minifigures with these historic builds. So how did you approach that with both the American and Japanese side, some of the weaponry, things like that?
So I'm still using the Frodo Baggins and the Lord of the Rings torsos. One of the things we saw obviously last year and then again the year before with Kadena Airfield, you can tell which kind of unit we are depicting based on what helmets they're wearing. So These guys don't have all the painted helmets. This is depicting Army units, whereas last year they all had the painted helmets, being the Marines. So it's easy to kind of swap them back and forth, especially Okinawa. The coalition force that landed, the U.S. 10th Army, was made up of 4 Marine divisions and 3 Army divisions. And then the Japanese, again, the same thing, using those torsos to just kind of depict the basics of the uniforms. But one of the cool things that I was able to do with the minifigures this year, Crazy Bricks actually did an entire batch of their Crazy Arms in sand green for me to be able to use on the Marines and the Army troops here to really get some really awesome minifig posability to really capture the story.
Yeah, it is really cool. So you can see some of those kind of like elbow elements, things like that minifig can't normally do, and it just creates much more realistic looking. So I like your approach with that. That's very impressive. Now, we talked a little bit about kind of the internal structure. So what was the process of kind of breaking this down for transport and bringing it to a show like Brick Fair?
So the original engineering for this project was made to be able to fly.
Oh.
And that did not end up happening, which is probably a good thing. But it comes apart. It's almost entirely modular. So the Technic frames have it set up so that all the landscape is built on 16 by 16 plates. So the entirety of the top of the Hacksaw Ridge comes apart into, I guess, 56 sections or 54 sections. All the walls break down, the Technic frames come off, the rock panels in the front come off, and all the lower landscape pathways come off. So it breaks down almost entirely flat, can get wrapped and packed into bins to be traveled. For this show, it came in 3 big bins, and it probably would have fit simultaneous on a pallet or something like that to be able to fly or ship with it. But I really wanted to make it as sturdy and breakdownable as possible to be able to travel 2 different shows. This is the only show it's going to end up being at, most likely, but it made its way here. I didn't have to rebuild much of anything. I had some issues with the table on Wednesday, but we always have issues with the tables, so.
What were some of the details down here? We haven't talked about the section at the bottom yet here.
So this was one of the areas I started with. I really wanted to get this transition from the lower landscape up into where the nets were going to be. And I wanted to include the aid station. Obviously, you had the Navy corpsmen, but then you also had the U.S. medics, or the U.S. Army medics. And I really wanted to capture some of the brutality of war. Obviously, you have a lot of casualties up top, but also what the guys who were lowered off the cliff by Desmond and all the other medics who were on Hacksaw, were going through. So you have all the medical personnel down there, with bandages and all kinds of stuff, really trying to treat the soldiers who were injured up top.
Do you find now that you've done this series for a number of years, people come to Brick Fair and look for the next installment? Have you had any of the public interacting with the build?
For sure. I definitely get people who come from the Instagram who see the previous builds or have watched me build this on the Instagram and see it in person. And it's definitely now people just expect me to be building rock work, which has only happened 3 times, but ironically enough, next year we'll also have some rock work on it too. So it's definitely something that people just kind of assume that I'm bringing Pacific stuff, and I don't see myself stopping anytime soon.
Perfect. You mentioned your Instagram there, so where can people find you online? What types of stuff do you post out there while you're doing a build?
So I'm at Brick History on Instagram. It's usually reels of time-lapsing of building these big projects, as well as some other kind of simpleton posts for the more vignette-style builds that I've been doing on a more recent scale.
Perfect. And I know you've been involved in kind of the organization of Brick Fair, especially with the military section here. So if someone's watching this or any of our other Brick Fair videos and want to display in the future, how does that work kind of generally if somebody's looking to get involved maybe with their own military builds and displaying at Brick Fair?
Yeah, so I mean, if it's an individual build, right, you can register for the show, register the mock, and I'll have a list. I'll be able to see all that stuff, and there will be space for you here. The military community personally here at Brick Fair is fantastic. It's the same group of guys, every year and has been for a long time. And every year we get new people to bring bigger and better stuff, and we're always kind of building each other up. And we all definitely improve as we learn from each other. So
yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much for taking us through the build here, Caden.
Thank you.